Welcome to another week of the Young Turks, our last week before the midterm elections. So if things are gonna get much worse, it's gonna be now.
Let's do it now.
Let's do it now, come on, let's have fun before the midterms. Cenk and Anna's still out. Cenk will be back tomorrow. In the meantime, Francesca Fiorentini's still in, or I should say back in the studio.
Back. I mean, I was sleeping under here. You didn't notice, I've been nesting.
And I guess Ben is here too. And welcome, Ben. Always good to have you here.
You know, there's a new poll, a good poll today regarding the midterms that I think.
Which poll?
Since most of the time I wring my hands and think this is going to be awful. A USC, Dorn's Life, LA Times poll, which was a poll I must say that Trump did very well in 2016. In fact, he was leading like at a time when Hillary had a size.
I appreciate that information because I'm like, really, where were they in 2016?
Yeah, they ended up being right in 2016. Democrats leading in a generic congressional ballot by 17 points among likely voters. So,
yeah, I'll believe it when it happens.
I got it. I'm just saying.
Are we accounting for the cheating and the stealing?
We had,
which we're going to talk about.
The suppressing.
To give you a little preview, we are going to talk about vote switching in Texas. We're going to talk about the likelihood of youth turnout increasing. We've got some interesting polls there as well.
I'm overstating this in its simplicity, but we had seen that generic ballot sort of shrink and shrink. It spread back out a little, but it went from 11, 12 points to 5, 6 points. So it's nice to see one at 17, and it coincides, which gives it a little credence with another drop in the last week of the president's favorability rating. So hopefully that's a good sign to come Tuesday. Yeah, what I like is that there are people out there who are still making up their mind about this guy. Like last week, they're like, he's doing some good things. The economy, I forgot. Racist, that's right.
Yes.
Slipped my mind for a while.
Yeah, they were convinced the first couple hundred times. So look, we are going to be talking about Trump, actually, his rhetoric concerning the recent political violence we've seen across the country over the past week. We're also going to talk about the tragic shooting over the weekend. And then not only are we having midterms, which we are, as I said, going to talk about, but Brazil just had a pretty big, pretty important election. We're going to talk about that. And in particular, we're going to talk about the likely environmental impact of that election. And then in the second hour, I believe, Francesca, you're going to be rotating out. Brooke Thomas is going to be joining us. Got an awesome hour for you there as well. But we're going to make the most of you while we can.
Fine.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily have opened with, hey, when does the girl in the middle leave?
When you put it like that, it sounds a lot worse. But I'm happy to give this seat to Brooke. But I really think we should take yours, Ben.
I don't disagree.
Let's do a poll, actually.
Right now.
Okay.
Tweet me.
But lots of important information to get to, and we actually don't have much time.
Tell the Jew to leave. Anyway, go on.
Okay, really can't win here. Too soon. Too soon. Why don't we transition to why it is too soon?
All right.
And talk about the news. This weekend, a man killed 11 people in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, additionally injuring 4 other people. Today, he appeared in court, and prosecutors are now vowing to pursue the death penalty. We want to give you all the information on how that played out. But the numbers, first of all, 11 deaths, believed to be the deadliest on the Jewish community in US history, according to the Anti-Defamation League. That's the sort of news that we get in America. And it'll be news for a couple days, and then we'll move on as a country. But yeah, absolutely horrendous. And when you look at the list of the victims, you are looking at generally grandparents and great-grandparents. I believe there was one 97-year-old. A number of people in that list that are
Rose Mallinger, 97 years old. Yeah.
And was she actually a Holocaust survivor?
I think she was here. I think she lived through the Holocaust here, but she obviously was a Holocaust survivor. She was born in 1921.
Sure.
I mean, had lived through that time. But I think she was I was initially told that she had been a Holocaust survivor, and then it looks like she was, I think, grew up here. So.
Yeah, in any event, I mean, most of them, or a good number, have had to live through not just that experience, and then watching in America as we have gradually become more tolerant of Nazism and those sorts of things, and seeing anti-Semitism being normalized in the media and in one political party. And this is where we're at, where we get historic attacks against the Jewish community. To make it clear, if it wasn't clear enough when this guy went in and shot up the synagogue, as he was injured in a shootout with police, they managed to take him alive. It's weird how in some cases they can do that, and others they can't. They have to kill them instantly.
They take him to Burger King or Jack in the Box. I forgot which one it was.
Exactly, for
wherever
Dylan
they took
Roof.
Dylan Roof. Yeah.
Yeah. So they took him, and he said to a SWAT officer when he was taken that he quote wanted all Jews to die, and said he had a reason. It was because Jews were quote committing genocide against his people. So the people who helped spread the white genocide conspiracy theory, some people are apparently listening to that, and they take it seriously.
You know, so this guy is obviously, for a host of reasons, has some issues. And you know, the doctor who treated him, or a doctor who treated him, or at least a doctor who went up to him while he was in the hospital, is a member of that congregation and was working in the emergency ward that night. That may be his primary task. And he went up to him and said what he says to everybody who is, how you feeling? And he was groggy and said, but he said he was doing okay. And the doctor said, hey, look, you know, this guy is of limited mental capacity. That seemed clear to me, at least but you know, and I thought right then that might be used as an excuse by some who are looking to separate this from politics. But of course, that's what the kind of rhetoric that we get, that's who that speaks to, right? When you talk about and echo and shout out and continually reiterate conspiracies of, and in fact, very specifically for him, a Jewish conspiracy to smuggle migrants into the country and destroy, in his words, destroy my people.
Yeah, and I just want to say that I have been like stricken, and there's no other way to take this or see this than feel stricken when you see mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers murdered in a place of worship or anywhere, but especially in a place of worship. It is a vulnerable and sacred and important community space. So that's just one. And the second is that when Donald Trump was elected, headstones in Jewish cemeteries were toppled in celebration. So this anti-Semitism we've seen coming. We've heard Tucker Carlson talk about white genocide. We've heard many other Fox contributors talk about Soros, George Soros, right? We've seen over the last 2 years and before the slow validation of Alex Jones-like speak into mainstream Fox and right-wing news outlets.
Globalists.
Soros, it's all an anti-Semitic sort of code words. There are political cartoons with George Soros's mouth open and a bunch of migrants pouring out of it as if he is orchestrating the refugees and the migrants that are coming up from Central America. All the signs were there, and that's the thing about dog whistling and the thing about and the thing about bigotry. The anti-immigrant bone is connected to the anti-Semitism bone, is connected to the anti-Muslim bone. You don't separate these things out, right? It's like, this is exactly, they know who they're dog whistling to. When you say Mexicans are rapists, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to say, oh yeah, and the Jews run everything, and they're controlling us.
Yeah.
So you sink one foot in and you go the whole way, and now we see it all playing out. Right? And the fact that our president hasn't stood up and said that bigotry is wrong and anti-Semitism is absolutely wrong, although now he's making these really half-assed attempts, because his first response was they should have been armed.
Well, you know, so I love everything you said except for the end, and I know why you said it, and I say it all the time too, and so it's good to hear somebody else say it so I can make sure I don't. Because suppose he had condemned it in a way that we thought was appropriate. Like, the danger of a guy like Donald Trump is, and why his poll numbers fluctuate when they should only go down, right? No one at any, there were times in the Soviet Union where the bread lines were shorter, right? And then, so it works out, people are like, maybe Stalin's not that bad. Man, I went in, I got bread today, it was out in 5 minutes. We had a good meal, there was butter, it was great. We had we had some milk. What a day, right? So they think he's a monster. Trump's a monster. Yeah. And those opposed to him now at this moment in history should never forget that. And you don't give him political victories. You don't work with him. You work only to defeat him. And the danger is that we have this instinct as humans, as good people, millions, tens of millions of us, that therefore when he does something right, as any person does something right, you want to say, all right, well, he condemned it. He condemned it in the right way. But that just gives him an excuse, which is not, of course, your intent or mine either when I say it, to then go out and continue the dog whistling.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there is no appropriate response. His damage is done, and he cannot undo it.
Well, if there was, it would look a little bit different than what he's getting, or even I would say different than what people are suggesting. First of all, I want to say, because we're going to talk about how the numbers have changed, these anti-Semitic attacks. I know some people want to minimize it, but it is a serious problem. And we said when Donald Trump was campaigning that if he gets into office, this will embolden these sorts of people. Victory, having all political power in this country will not be enough for them. They will be sent after specific targets, and that is what we're seeing week after week now. And in very particular ways, this guy on Gab was spreading the conspiracy theories about the caravan being funded by Jewish people in America, which isn't just something that weirdos talk about on social media. Congressman Getz was spreading that on Twitter as well. On Fox News, they're talking about that, trying to make these links. People listen, some of these people are insane.
It's on Fox today, today.
Exactly. And so I don't wanna hear him come out and say, hate is wrong, don't hate people. Like him at this point, him saying pretty much anything would be useless. But if he's going to say something, I want him to come out and say, if you hate Jewish people, I don't want your support. If you believe that Jewish people are behind conspiracies, if you think they're secretly controlling things, if you think that they are invading America with Mexicans, I don't want your support. I don't want anything to do with you. And furthermore, if you think there is any ambiguity about whether Nazis are good or bad, I don't want your support. Don't come to my rallies. Don't wear my hat. Don't go to my website. Don't tweet MAGA.
David Duke, though? I've never heard of him.
Exactly. If you wanted to be unambiguous, you could be unambiguous. Say that African Americans are every bit as American and patriotic as us. Don't attack them at my rallies. Don't be shouting racial slurs at them. The media is a fundamentally important part of America. We would be far worse off and probably would not still have democracy if not for them. So do not say that CNN sucks. Don't go after specific journalists. If you have any inclination whatsoever to send a bomb to CNN, never ever associate yourself with me or my party again. We do not want you. Ambiguity is easy. Similarly, being unambiguous would be easy too. He chooses not to do that because he desperately wants your support.
And that's the president, right? Oh yeah, that's what we hope for. But what about Republicans? What about, and this is the thing that I come back to, because I think in the last 2 years we've had this debate over whether white supremacy was the main event, whether it was the main course, or whether it was sort of a side dish, right? Whether this was sort of this, a sort of distraction, if you will, the culture wars, whether the real thing was, Trump is a Trojan horse for tax cuts. He's a Trojan horse for billionaires, for overturning Roe v. Wade, for all of these conservative things that the likes of Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz have wanted
to let capitalism run free.
Exactly.
Right.
And in fact, while of course he is a Trojan horse for the capitalist billionaires to do whatever they want with working people, I do think that white supremacy is the main event here. And it can't, nor Republicans, nor Democrats or progressives should treat white supremacy as it's just his way to sort of throw a bone. Because that bone is getting people killed. Yeah. And the midterms is about voting against and voting out white supremacy.
On Old School last week, Cenk brought up Hitler. Again, I always hate saying it because
oh, that guy.
You're always bringing up Hitler.
Yeah, not Adolf Hitler. Vic Hitler. That was a character on Hill Street Blues. He was a narcoleptic comic named Vic Hitler. So, and it was only in the point of that the early coverage of Hitler, and there's a great 1922 New York Times piece on Hitler, and it's not the only piece like this of people saying, yeah, the anti-Semitic, he's whipping up. It's just a distraction, right? I mean, they were saying it then that yeah, it's awful and it didn't sound good, but he has tapped into something valuable, and a lot of experts saying, I wouldn't worry too much about that. This is an effort to sort of get the people on his side.
He's a socialist.
Right, so that he can sort of, enact the vital and necessary social changes that he thinks Germany needs. So, that's to your point that it as it turned out, it was the main show.
Yeah.
It wasn't mostly about taxes?
No, it wasn't.
No,
it wasn't mostly about getting Krupps to build tanks.
Yeah. So a couple of important other elements that I do want to get to. This most recent attack against the synagogue takes place in a context of rising anti-Semitic harassment and attacks and vandalism and all of that's been going back a few years now. So in 2017, the last year for which complete data is available, the ADL found that there had been 1,986 reported anti-Semitic incidents in the United States that year. That was a 57% increase from 2016, which itself had seen a 35% uptick in incidents from 2015. I don't know what happened in 2015 that caused that. Something probably. The surge between 2016 and 2017 was the highest increase in incidents on record since the ADL started reporting on them in 1979. And in a particular form of this, the combination of the anti-Semitism and the anti-media rhetoric, between mid-2015 and mid-2016, more than 800 journalists received a staggering 19,000 anti-Semitic messages on Twitter. So, look, this is the single worst incident. I hope that record is never broken. But I mean, we are seeing this year after year. It's getting worse and worse. This is matched with, you can see the Southern Poverty Law Center has numbers for the increase in extremist groups. The white supremacist and anti-Semitic and neo-Nazi groups are exploding in numbers as well. At the same time, parts of the federal government, like the Combating Violent Extremism group that targets white supremacist groups and things like that, right-wing domestic terrorist groups as well, was defunded by Donald Trump after previously having funding under Barack Obama. And so we are seeing all of this. And so we're gonna have some quotes from like Donald Trump, but understand that like one statement that he makes with a wink and a nod exists in a context of absolutely horrific harassment and violence.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing that is important to mention is that when, let's say, white supremacist groups, although they don't call themselves that, right? They're identitarian, which is just like, oh yeah, I'm a Hitler enthusiast. I'm not a Nazi. I just like the mustache. Identitarian. And this is, anyway, when they do march, when they do protest, oftentimes they are protected by police officers. And I'm not trying to, come down. I mean, listen, in this case, police officers did try to stop this massacre and were wounded in it, right? Which implodes the good guy with a gun theory when it comes to mass shootings. But just to say that the police are not standing in the middle and saying we're going to protect, sort of racial justice protesters, or maybe it is Antifa, right? But in their militant way. But they protect the Proud Boys. They often will protect those white supremacist organizations, and it's a head scratcher. You got to wonder. It's like, all right.
Yeah, right. I mean, we obviously you got the right to march in this country. We've established that, but we should also recognize that these are different times, and we should think about it differently. Not change our mind about whether we protect marchers. We should always protect marchers, but. Something different is happening now. This isn't a random march in Skokie of a fringe organization. This is these are people who have been, I mean, we keep saying a wink and a nod, but have largely been embraced by one of the two political parties in the country.
Yeah. And openly, we've seen the way that conversations on, 4chan, 8chan, whatever, subreddit they're forced to discuss on, but the way that stuff trickles up now to Fox News.
It's fast.
It's fast. And I just want to say, for those of you who are disheartened out there, for like the fact that I'm feeling very depressed and sad, we all know this is a sign that Republican and right-wing morality is dead and gone, that they have no platform to stand on anymore, which is why they've chosen to embrace the most extremist views among them, because they're like, hey, we only really stand for like the rights of billionaires, so what do we got? I know, racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, just whatever.
Fear.
It's gonna rile fear, it'll rile up the base. When the majority of Americans do believe in Medicare for all, do believe in schools, and do believe in disarming or at least reining in the mass amount of weaponry that we have among us, do believe that in LGBTQ rights, women's rights, they're pro-choice. Excuse me, woo! We forget about that. Yay!
Yes. Okay, we're just gonna move on. Maybe people won't even notice it. Okay, before we go to our first break, I do want to briefly get to what Donald Trump initially said in reaction to this. So President Trump was asked about this recent shooting, and he had a few ideas about what we could do to actually make it less likely that it would happen in the future. Here's the first part.
Mr. President, do you think you need to revisit gun laws earlier this year?
Talk up, please.
Gun laws, Mr. President.
Well, again, this has little to do with it. If you take a look, if they had protection inside, the results would have been far better. This is a dispute that will always exist, I suspect. But if they had some kind of a protection inside the temple, maybe it could have been a very much different situation.
Okay, so hold on that for 1 second. So again, like always, don't protect people outside of the temple by changing the laws and making it less likely that people like this would have things like AR-15s. Just try to have a last bit of defense right inside of every building in America. And if that's not enough, he has one other idea.
And again, to end this kind of violence.
Well, it's a violence that's, you look at the violence all over the world. I mean, the world has violence. The world is a violent world. And you think when you're over it, it just sort of goes away, but then it comes back in the form of a madman, a wacko. I think one thing we should do is we should stiffen up our laws in terms of the death penalty. When people do this, they should get the death penalty, and they shouldn't have to wait years and years. They should really suffer the ultimate price. They should pay the ultimate price. I felt that way for a long time.
I get that he's not, like that response seems stupid. It's not stupid. He knows exactly what he's doing.
No, I think it seems stupid. And
it's an evasion. The reason it's stupid is we need the death penalty because that'll scare people off. I mean, if we know anything about this synagogue shooter, it's that he was looking forward to a good long life after doing this massacre. I mean, come on. If you're a conservative, if you're right wing in any way, do you honestly think that when people decide to strap themselves with rifles and go into a church or a synagogue and start shooting it up, they're worried about what might happen to them eventually?
There's been a litany of scholarship on the deterrent aspect of the death penalty, and it is overwhelming. There are little tiny things that people could quibble with about certain crimes where the death penalty might actually serve as a deterrent, but it is an infinitesimally small percentage of all the crimes that people want to execute folks for. When you're going to commit a murder, you're not worried about the punishment. You're looking not to get caught.
Yeah, it's almost like there's something wrong with mass murderers.
Right, but it's not, or forget mass, just if you think I hate my family and I want to be free and I want to date some other people and I don't want to be tied down with my kids, I'm going to kill my whole family. You're not thinking, but I might get the death penalty, so I'll let them live. That's not how people think. They think they're going to get away with it. That's why they do it. Or, like this guy, you think I'm probably going to die today in a hail of police bullets until I chicken out.
But what a brilliant whataboutism of violence. Well, people die every day, you know, right? Every 30 seconds, somebody dies. There we go.
There, somebody died.
Right there, somebody died.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. And I think, again, dog whistling, like that, not condemning in the words that you so brilliantly laid out, John.
Thank you.
But not condemning the kinds of support that you get, the fact that the bomb threats, the guy who planted those bombs, his van was littered in your paraphernalia, your pro-Trump paraphernalia. It's a win. Like, white supremacists look at that and they're like, that's a win, that's a W. Like, are you kidding me? The fact that he doesn't overtly say this was horrible and disgusting and I disavow anyone who thinks that my politics are about this kind of hate, which we know it is. It's like, there's nothing to disavow.
But these are, we're talking about people who I think to some extent legitimately thought that Barack Obama was on an apology tour. Like that stuck with, they think that apology or self-analysis, thoughtfulness, but any degree of self-evaluation is a sign of tremendous weakness.
Yeah.
So he just comes on strong, and it wouldn't even occur to him. In fact, we know the angriest he's gotten is when the very few times that they have pulled back from something, right? And then 2 days later, he says, that was a huge mistake. We should never have done that.
Yeah, I mean, he mocked Al Franken for resigning, that sort of thing. Yeah, you never surrender the slightest bit. The problem isn't like the world's a dangerous place. You know what? There's gun violence everywhere. Who's to say if America has less, more, the exact amount as other countries? We shouldn't look it up. We should just assume. And he says there, it's it comes as a wacko. It's not a wacko. It's a guy who believes very specific things about Jewish Americans.
Yep.
Very specific conspiracy theories that you come across, not you, but him, on Fox News and on Breitbart and on all these websites. Very specific things that seem crazy to reasonable people, but they exist in a sort of media atmosphere that has been stoked by right-wing politicians and used for their electoral advantage.
And it's again, and today, I mean, maybe the video I saw was from this weekend, but I saw stuff today on Fox that no, it had to be in the last couple. It had to have been since Pittsburgh, where they're back. You know, they've echoed. They said it before, but I mean, they're still talking about the migrant caravan, which was one thing that that Robert Bowers thought had been infiltrated by this Jewish relief organization, and they're talking leprosy. I mean, he talks about it's a national security threat and it's a public health threat. Because of the diseases they have from Africa and the Middle East, leprosy. They're bringing leprosy in it's been documented. And there's a host on Fox, I don't know.
So where do the evangelists stand on this?
Yeah, right.
Leprosy, Can we
we should help
the
them.
second coming, maybe that's how we spin it. It's like, if we bring the lepers in here, then Jesus is gonna come back and oops, he's Arab. It'll be fun.
Okay, we do have to take our first break. We come back a little bit more on Trump. Will he overall turn down his rhetoric in response to this wave of political violence? We'll find out after this. Back to the Young Turks, everybody. I want to read a few members' comments. I wanted to disagree slightly. So Joyanne 1960 messaged us, polls are meaningless since corruption at the ballot box, a la Brazil, seems to be happening around the country. The GOP just can't win without cheating, like the establishment Dems. I don't disagree that there is voter suppression. And
we need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of On the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
All sorts of things like that. But I do disagree with any statement that polls are meaningless or I've seen a lot of criticism of polls, very rarely in-depth criticism of polls coming from people who put together and construct polls. And as someone who has literally studied the construction of polls, some polls are wrong, but they're not as wrong as most people seem to think they are. And especially out of 2016, everybody seems to think that no polls mean anything. Even though, Hillary lost.
They got it right.
But the polls were right. She won by like 3 points. She just didn't win the Electoral College, which the polls have nothing to say about.
And I mean, no, there's some state polls were wrong. There's some state polls were
exactly.
wrong.
We remember during the primaries, Michigan was way off on Bernie.
But it's also how we look at numbers. If you say somebody's going to win by 7 and they win by 3, a poll was off by 4 points. If you say somebody was going to win by 2 and they lost by 2, it's the same 4 points. Yeah. It just seems a lot more dramatic.
It seems way more wrong.
That's right.
Yeah.
But also, I'm going to object to that because I just, again, there's a false equivalency in that. And you know, if you were privy to my conversations with my friends, which you would not want to be, I am the radical. I am what are you talking about? Explaining to them why progressives aren't going to support Cory Booker, right? Or why Chuck Schumer has largely been a failure, right? But that said, when you send out a tweet that the corruption and the cheating is the same among establishment Dems and the Republican Party, it's just wildly inaccurate, and you are living in a different universe. There are all kinds of reasons to think that establishment Democrats have not just let progressives down, but in some sense have let the country down because unquestionably that played a role in creating, I think, the political environment that allows people like the Brazilian president to rise because there's been so much corruption down there, and what allowed Donald Trump and this rise in the sort of radical alt-right here. But they're not going and preventing people from voting. deliberately attempting to appoint judges who keep people from voting, redistricting to take power away from minorities. They're not changing the voting laws so that thousands and thousands of Native Americans can't vote in North Dakota. They're not changing the laws so that they're disenfranchising hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of voters in Florida, Wisconsin. It is a very, very different level of corruption, and you should be aware of it.
I disagree in some parts because there are places like the New York Democratic Party, which their actual regulations for the state level voting is absolutely horrendous and definitely suppresses the vote in a number of different ways. So, by the way, Joyanne, first of all, thank you for focusing on voter suppression. I'm mainly not disagreeing with you. I'm disagreeing with the tweets that I get from time to time saying that anytime I report on polls, the polls are meaningless. So understand, I'm not totally disagreeing with you. And I do think that we should be concerned about voter suppression everywhere, even if it is not equally distributed across the spectrum.
Yeah, I got it. But what New York, the New York Democratic Party and one-party states, which New York almost is, in general, have been corrupt inside their own voting process. I'm talking about when we get to a general election. I think, as we've talked about, John, that the primary system in this country is comically stupid. It is fifth world, right? That we are electing federal officials in New York on a cockamamie set of rules, and they're doing it totally different in Iowa, and they're doing it different in New Hampshire and South Carolina and all over the country. We obviously should uniform the way we vote and do those processes. But that said, the manner in which parties dictate their primaries is not substantively way more screwed up in New York than in a lot of other places. It is messed up, however, everywhere. But that is
I don't think that she's talking about general elections.
I got it.
I think she's talking about primaries.
Well, okay, but I mean, but those one is a 10 on the Richter scale and one's a 4. And right now we need to pay attention to the 10s.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, look, today I'm going to be on TV for like 3.5 hours, so I could do both. Anyway, obviously we could talk about this for a couple of hours. So fascinating. Thank you, Joyanne, for sending us that message. I would read others, but we unfortunately enjoy talking about that so much that we don't have time. But thank you. I will say this. I don't know if you know, did you know there's an election coming? There's actually a midterm election coming, and you can tune in on the Young Turks virtually every minute of the day at tyt.com/live on November 6th. We are gonna be doing live coverage. The Damage Report is actually gonna be a 2-hour show that day, co-hosted by Cenk Uygur, of his choice actually. So it should be fun. We're gonna have our reporters Skyping in. We're gonna have people from around the country reporting on particular elections. We're gonna be doing live coverage all that night,
You're gonna
obviously.
be on a coffee drip?
Oh my God, I mean, I'm on a crazy amount of coffee right now. I'm gonna be on LaCroix and coffee.
All the pesticides.
And, and by the way, very excited, I wanna announce this. So the day before, actually I don't know if this is 100% sure, so maybe I shouldn't announce it, but I'm gonna do it anyway. The day before the election, our big preview day, we're gonna have live coverage at night. Starting off the day, the Damage Report that day is gonna be co-hosted in studio the entire show by activist and actress Alyssa Milano, who's been doing amazing work around the Kavanaugh hearings and a number of other issues, family separation, all that. She's gonna be in studio co-hosting with me, so it should be a lot of fun.
Look at John.
It will be cool. Okay, let's go back to not fun stuff.
Okay.
In the wake of both the mass shooting of a synagogue this weekend and the mass mail bombing campaign that was carried out over the past week, many reasonable people are asking for Donald Trump to perhaps not actively encourage more people to commit similar sorts of attacks, and he is bristling at that. Any responsibility whatsoever for someone who looks like the most devoted Trump fan in the history of Trumpness. There's been no acknowledgement that he's even a supporter, and no learning, or certainly no appearance of it. He tweeted this. Remember, by the way, as we read these tweets, that CNN has received multiple suspicious packages and attempted bombs and things like that. He said, there is great anger in our country caused in part by inaccurate and even fraudulent reporting of the news. The fake news media, the true enemy of the people, in caps, must stop the open and obvious hostility and report the news accurately and fairly. That will do much to put out the flame of anger and outrage, and we will then be able to bring all sides together in peace and harmony. Fake news must end. So the thing stopping peace and harmony is fake news. And by the way, when you're talking about the bombing of a media outlet, yelling fake news must end, you could do that differently, because that guy seemed to think that fake news needed to end, but he had a slightly different, slightly more violent way of doing that.
That's today. That's today.
This is after the attempted bombing.
So I mean, so whatever he does that makes that Jared and Ivanka got him to do, right? To talk
shooting.
A little tougher regard. It's all irrelevant. He gets no credit for it. He gets a 0. He gets an F- because of that tweet. It undermines everything.
Where's Hope Hicks? Where is
She works at Fox
Is she
now.
starting a new makeup line or a clothing line? I hope so. Are they gonna sell it at Nordstrom? I hope so. Here's the thing. Trump and the entire administration are such effing idiots when it comes to the media. And his entire whining is only because they have mishandled the media that were eating out of their hands when he won. When he met with the New York Times and Maggie Haberman and those editors after he won, he could have played them like a violin. But these like half-rate, sophomore badminton team of an administration. I'm sorry, like love badminton and I love sophomores. You guys don't deserve that. But what I'm saying is that any politician worth their salt would be able to play this media, whether it's CNN, whether it's the New York Times. But the fact that he has not been able to is a testament to how I'm just re-saying the same thing because the establishment media, whether it's CNN or MSNBC, have been waiting. Just give us a bone. Oh, just condemn the attacks, or say you believe that Nazism is bad. Like, just please. And they're still waiting. They're giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, but don't you? I'm not sure I agree with you, except for the dumb part. Like, but if he played them, that requires a different kind. He is not that person. That is not who he's ever been. He's an angry guy. He reacts emotionally. He is unbelievably narcissistic. So inevitably there was going to be criticism. And as soon as there was criticism, there was going to be condemnation. And he can't operate. If he is a more standard president, then he's just a failure, right? This is, and also then he obviously would have made some deals. He would have preserved Obamacare perhaps, right? As it became enormously popular, and would have worked with a handful of senators perhaps to get that done. And he would have been betrayed by many of the people who voted him would have felt betrayed by him. And that's all he wants. He wants the rallies, he wants that adulation, he wants the sense that he is the leader of a movement.
And therefore the media is actually gonna do their job in this case, and the fact that he's demonizing them only further, I mean, listen, reality is reality, truth is truth, and guess what? The reality has Trump is an idiot and is totally screwing up and is a racist and is a corrupt, like bankrupted however many dozens of times, businessman. Like, that's the reality. All I'm saying is that I feel like instead of demonizing the media, he could have had them eating out of his hand, and he did before the election. And that could have kept on going. And it would have behooved the Republicans, it would have behooved him and his administration. You got Kellyanne Conway and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who happen to be the two women who I mean, as much as I hate them, they go to bat for him every single day and are doing a pretty good job. Hope Hicks, another woman who was like, everyone's trying to rein this guy in. And again, the media, please just condemn something, or we're waiting for you. Like, we're waiting to validate your presidency. And you're right, and I do think narcissism and egoism are akin to idiocy. Like, he's such an idiot.
Well, you're right about one. You're definitely right that if he would occasionally give them the mainstream media, mostly television, I know you mentioned Maggie Haberman, but this is really, to me, mostly television that we're talking about. If he gave them that red meat that they want, I categorically condemn this. And if you feel this way, like John said, if these are your beliefs, I'm not interested in having you as a supporter, that kind of thing. I mean, we would hear, as we heard from 55 different people throughout this first 6 months of his presidency, maybe longer. Well, today is the day Donald Trump became president of the United States. Like, they're so desperate to say, finally, we're seeing a more presidential Donald Trump. Thankfully, that little trope has vanished. But it took a very long time for that to vanish. So you're right, in a sense, that from some, they're so desperate to give them the thing that they want, and the thing
that if he were a smarter authoritarian, if he were smarter about what he's trying to push through, if he were a smarter fascist, he would do that. But he's not, and that's for good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mainly at this point, like, we had the the Capitol Gazette shooting, any number of threats against politicians and things like that. Like, after he began demonizing Maxine Waters, she received death threats. The FBI had to investigate. Doesn't stop him from continually attacking her nonstop. A president choosing one congresswoman to repeatedly bring up for some reason. So I just wonder, like, we've caught this guy who sent all these bombs, and again, I want to note that I've never seen so much work being done by regular Americans and those in the right-wing media to do PR for a domestic terrorist. Like, oh, he didn't really mean it. It had flaws in the bombs. He didn't really want to blow anyone up. When has that sort of benefit of the doubt been given to a terrorist before? But they're doing it, and they continue to do it. They're lying about who he was politically. It's extremely obvious. He's been filming himself at rallies. I see on Fox and Friends, they were like, well, sure, he was a Trump supporter, but he's got a criminal history going back to 2002. Like, terrorism only counts if it's your first offense. That's Fox, by the way, saying that. And then the conspiracy theories about them like photoshopping the stickers and things like that. It's ridiculous. And I'm worried that there are people out there, if there was this guy, then there's 1 or 2 or 7 other people who love Donald Trump who are listening right now to what he is saying. And what message are they receiving? Are they receiving a message that he really hates what this guy in Florida did? That he really opposes it? Is that what they are hearing? I don't think so at all. They're gonna see this new true enemy of the people. He's increased its viciousness a little bit. And I think they continue to think that he secretly kind of supports this stuff. And if they were to do it, he, the domestic terrorist, like with the guy, the congressman who body slammed the reporter, would be Trump's kind of person. I think that there are crazy enough people out there that that's the message they're getting. And they don't have to. As we've said before, Donald Trump could be unambiguous if he wanted to be, but he continues to flirt with this. And I'll remind you again, what he said on Friday when asked if he would tone down his rhetoric. He said, you know what, maybe I'll tone it up. So he was threatening us then, and he is carrying through with that today.
That's not a thing, Mr. President.
Yeah, it's not actually
tone it up, not a phrase.
Well, it is, but it's like Pilates.
Exactly.
That's how you tone it up, not by encouraging violence. Okay, we do have to take another break. When we come back, though, we're going to return. Actually, we're going to turn away from the U.S. to Brazil. Presidential election, very consequential one. After this,
we hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment.
Welcome back, everyone. That was some nice, relaxing music. I want to read some message from you. I saw TYT live.
At TYT, we frequently talk about all the ways that big tech companies are taking control of our online lives, constantly monitoring us and storing and selling our data. But that doesn't mean we have to let them. It's possible to stay anonymous online and hide your data from the prying eyes of big tech. And one of the best ways is with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN hides your IP address, making your activity more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your network data to protect you from eavesdroppers and cyber criminals. And it's also easy to install. A single mouse click protects all your devices. But listen, guys, this is important. ExpressVPN is rated #1 by CNET and Wired magazine. So take back control of your life online and secure your data with a top VPN solution available, ExpressVPN. And if you go to expressvpn.com/TYT, you can get 3 extra months for free with this exclusive link just for TYT fans. That's expressvpn.com/TYT. Check it out today.
From Dark King Zero, who said, if Trump is dumb, and he very much is, what's that mean for the media that's constantly waiting for him to be better than he is? Trump is a white supremacist, racist, sexist, fascist, bigot, full stop, which is apparently the case. I want to do the member shoutouts as well. Steve Valenzuela and Connie Wilkerson, thank you for being members. Did you know that we're in a member drive, by the way? And in addition, I'm gonna be doing a little bit later, I'll give you details, but we actually finally have gifting now, thankfully. So I know a lot of people want to introduce TYT to friends and relatives and things like that. Maybe you have a Trump-loving relative. It's worth a try, couldn't hurt. We'll give you details a little bit later on about that. But I wanna turn to some different material. Okay. The extreme far-right candidate, Jair Bolsonaro, has won the Brazilian presidential election despite a decades-long history of racism and misogyny and homophobia and opposition to democracy in Brazil. Which seems like that would hurt you in a democracy, but it doesn't seem to have been that much of an issue. He won something like 55.1% to 45, I think. Pretty good lead. And now he is going to be president. And it leaves a lot of people inside of Brazil, and here we're looking on there as well, wondering what effect this will actually have on different aspects of Brazilian society and their economy and things like that. So first of all, any surprise whatsoever that after that, we're in the second round now, that after that first round he went on to win?
No, he was expected to win, and and we're on the heels here of what the last 3 Brazilian leaders are either in prison or have been indicted, right? So, and I don't, my limited understanding, and I haven't read too deeply on the history, I read about him, but that, some of those charges are totally genuine and some of them are not. But either way, there has been massive corruption, and we've had clearly political parties, that the Workers' Party, that has let down the very people that it's supposed to represent. And I'm not, again, I don't want to do to Brazilian politics what people want to do here, which is sort of blame the losers rather than the people who are doing it. But that said, if again, we keep thinking if we're not careful, it'll happen here. It is happening here. Like it has literally happened here. We have such a strong, vibrant democracy that we're not yet shutting down media outlets that are critical of Trump, but has been thoughtfully pointed out, I think a couple weeks ago, and I think it was the New York Times Review of Books, they don't have to shut down anymore because they have a propaganda arm.
I think that psychologically it makes sense that Brazil went this way, and it's awful. But because the corruption scandal that hit the Workers' Party hit a couple of other parties, right? Like, this was the thing about how, and I hate to use the term, trumped up some of those charges was that the scandal that took down Lula and took down Rousseff affected many different politicians from many different parties. It spanned party. So it wasn't just the Workers' Party. And so from a sort of average Brazilian, you're like, everyone's corrupt here, and sort of a throw up your hands, I don't know what to do. Why not this? Why not extreme ideas? And I'm not saying all Brazilians wanted to vote that way, but sort of from a I'm fed up with how things are, and I'm fed up with all these parties. Why not?
I think it's deeper than that, because it was deeper than that here, and it was deeper than that with Brexit. But it wasn't just that everybody's corrupt. That feeling has permeated politics across the globe for some time. More than that is a sense that politics has left us behind, has betrayed us. That the party that was supposed to look out for us as rich get richer and poor, and being poor in Brazil is being poor, have left us out. And so when you are totally sort of rudderless and without a sense that the state is willing to do anything to truly improve your lot in life, or even throw you a lifeline to where you yourself might be able to improve your own lot in life, barring winning the lottery, then what you want to do is you instinctively, we know politically that it worked again, to go back to Germany, it worked then when some strong man comes in and says, first of all, the Jews did it, the blacks did it, the darker Brazilians did it, the gays did it. They're coming to, they're taking your jobs, and I am going to fix it. And I tell you how I'm going to fix it. I'm going to punch them in the face. And if I have to put them in jail, I'll put them in jail. No, and it works, but it requires a degree of a sense of betrayal on the part of working class voters to go that way.
I think if you were elected in a democracy, you cannot then dissolve the democracy. Can we just institute that general moral code? He's very anti-democratic. He says he believes if he's got to dissolve Congress,
I'm going to go through all
he'll do that.
Yeah, well, I guess the problem is try to stop them. And that's the thing. And that is why, back during the election, I was saying here in America, not to make this too much of an America, you don't play games with letting fascists take over. I don't care what three-dimensional chess you think you're playing. That is a very dangerous game, and it doesn't generally go well historically. But I do want to go through a few of his comments to give you a reason, if you haven't been following this election, why there is concern on a number of different areas. And by the way, in terms of US media coverage of this, I have read in the wake of his win, a number of fawning, whitewashing editorials about what he represents. But before it as well, the Wall Street Journal was pretending that he was just an anti-establishment guy. And I want to give credit in this case, again, to John Oliver, who did an amazing breakdown of Bolsonaro back, I believe it was even before the first round of the voting, but certainly weeks ago.
Yeah, that was excellent.
So first of all, before I read some of his past comments, here is how Donald Trump, who is aware of all this, greeted this victory. He said, had a very good conversation with the newly elected president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, who won his race by a substantial margin. We agreed that Brazil and the United States will work closely together on trade, military, and everything else. Excellent call, wished him congrats. And if he is jealous that Jair actually won the popular vote, he was able to not mention it in that tweet. So here are some of the things that he has said previously. He said that if he had a gay son, he would be unable to love him and would prefer that he die in an accident. He said, this is a controversial one. He said a fellow lawmaker in Congress wasn't attractive enough to be raped because she was ugly. He said, she's not my type. I would never rape her. I'm not a rapist, but if I were, I wouldn't rape her because she doesn't deserve it. That was just 4 years ago.
Cute.
He responded to a question in 2011 about what he would do if his son fell in love with a black woman by saying, quote, I don't run that risk because my sons were very well educated.
Boy, I would like to ask the follow-up of two choices. Your son marries a black woman or he's gay. Go.
He might be very conflicted.
Right.
And like a fembot, he would turn down. So look, in terms of the misogyny, racism, homophobia, things like that, he's got this long history there. In terms of what he will do in government, there are very real reasons to be concerned. He said this, I am in favor of torture, you know that, and the people are in favor of it too. Although to be fair, many Republican politicians would say the exact same thing, so maybe we can't fault him too much there. In terms of the future of democracy in Brazil, he once said, there is no doubt I would perform a coup on the same day. This is after a hypothetical where he becomes president. This is before. I would perform a coup on the same day. Congress doesn't work, and I am sure that at least 90% of the population would celebrate and applaud because it doesn't work. The Congress today is useless. Let's do the coup already. Let's go straight to the dictatorship. So he is enthusiastic that 90% of the population would be okay with dissolving democracy in Brazil. Maybe not 90%. I saw a poll that showed that 12% are in favor of getting rid of democracy there. He also said elections won't change anything in this country. Unfortunately, it will only change on the day that we break out in civil war here and do the job that the military regime didn't do, killing 30,000 people. If some innocent people die, that's fine. In every war, innocent people die. I will even be happy if I die, as long as 30,000 others go with me. And again, congrats from Donald Trump.
He's gonna have his little terracotta soldiers, right? Like 30,000 other people go with me, that like the ancient burial ground. Anyway, I just want a point of clarity around, the most popular politician in Brazil is Lula da Silva, the former president, who's actually in jail right now. So if he had been allowed to run, he might have as well have won. The country is obviously incredibly divided, but essentially it's as if either Bernie or Hillary in this case, either one, but if the calls for lock her up actually happened and Hillary was in prison and was unable to run, in which case we might have had Bernie. But anyway, the point is that they managed to actually lock the opposition up. But I also want to say, study the history of Latin American politics, especially recently, very interesting. Lula da Silva was part of, and the Workers' Party was part of a pink tide, as they called it, sort of this quasi-socialist, very much left of center, kind of what I would say like the pre-electoral Obama. Imagine if Obama sort of made good on the promises that campaigning Obama did. And then they had enjoyed sort of progressive reign or whatever, right? The progressives were in power. And they lifted the middle class. They strengthened the social safety nets, education, sort of basic welfare, job programs, literacy programs. This happened in Venezuela, this happened in Argentina, this happened in Brazil. And then kind of 10 years of that, and the left got cocky and they sat on their laurels. And a lot of the people that were becoming better educated and were becoming, that they lifted out of poverty. For example, Brazil, but also Venezuela had a huge decrease in the amount of extreme poverty from, let's say, the 90s when, remember, Latin America was just neoliberal, World Economic Forum, World Trade Organization, World Bank, like you are indebted to these creditors, you got foreign investment all over the place, no national industry, we're just gonna mine you for whatever, literally and figuratively. And then of course this pink tide comes in. Well, now we're just seeing the complete backlash. And I feel like it is, if and when we have a progressive movement that takes power in this country, it's a lesson to us to not sit back on our laurels and to constantly be vigilant and to constantly be pushing. And I think in some ways, in the ways that Obama kind of cut the progressive legs out from underneath his campaign, right, and became much more of a centrist president. You saw that in Latin America as well, that a lot of these more progressive leaders cut the legs out and then turn their backs on social movements that helped them get elected. So a lot of stuff there, but it's fascinating and horrible what's going on right now. And what he means when he's talking about the 30,000, it's hearkening back to what I believe he said before, basically the dictatorships of the 80s, 70s and 80s.
Which he admires.
Which he admires, didn't finish the job.
That's right.
Didn't kill enough people.
Didn't kill enough people and should finish the job.
He said specifically the only mistake that the dictatorship made was that it favored torture over murder.
Right, and he wants to kill his political opponents. That's what, and so what would cause 55% of the voters to vote for a guy who'd said these things? How has he not laughed? So that's why we got to look carefully at what is, are 55% of Brazilians terrible people?
Yeah.
I doubt it. Right,
so
and it's easier to talk about. It's funny, and that which should also probably make us think about what's happening here. There are 63 million people here who voted for Donald Trump. Are they terrible people? Right? I don't know. We're more comfortable saying the Brazilians aren't all terrible people, but it's really they're. Do
you think Brazilians have more empathy for Trump voters?
I don't know. Brazilians like those New York Times pieces. Like, who are those Trump voters? Yeah, that's right. But we should also say that in a country where, again, where the political establishment had abandoned the working class and those living in poverty, of which there's a substantial number in Brazil, there are also a staggering murder rate. In Brazil, 60,000 homicides a year. So there is a sense then that a guy like this can capitalize on, look, man, things are out of control. You can't get a job. If you do get a job, it doesn't pay. The black people and the gay people and the foreigners or whoever he demonizes, the leftists are coming to get you. And you're not safe in your home or walking down the street. You might get murdered, which is true.
Sure.
That makes that that makes this his overall message of strength, which is very similar to Trump, work, and lets people look past this or reframe it in, he doesn't mean it, he just means he's tough and he's not gonna take any crap and he's gonna get things done.
Well, it's interesting that in that, I mean, we don't have, that quite that bad in terms of a murder rate in a particular area, but he did try to sort of get that idea across during the campaign. And since, I mean, he's going around saying that ICE has to liberate towns in Long Island from MS-13. That he said literally that they're looking out their windows like in World War II for the Allied troops coming in.
Leprosy,
he doesn't actually give the example of where that actually happened.
No, I got you. They made up leprosy. I mean, they make up threats consistently, make up threats that sound that, and it's so good. I mean, like I wouldn't pay attention to an argument, to a debate on television. We before the show went on the air, we were talking a little bit about Politicon, and all three of us sort of had enough of the debates, and everybody's a debate.
All love to the TYT debaters.
Right, God bless. Well, they're great, but I mean, enough debating, right? It's not a great way to solve a problem. But never in the history of cable news has anyone ever said, this line I've used often, oh man, Francesca, great point. I never really thought about it that way. Like that's never happened since they decided to pit a right winger and a left winger. That has never happened. So
you don't think Combs won a bunch?
That's right. Yeah. So by the same token, I don't pay attention to these debates on television as I'm listening in the background playing some clip, and then a guy said they've got leprosy, and I was like, what? Like, it worked. It paid attention. When is leprosy mentioned on cable TV?
I do think, though, like I said, I think you look at Latin America and you see a little bit of the US's future if and when we are not on top economically. I think so much of the Make America Great Again, yes, is racism, but it's also like we're losing our, role as the hegemon or the economic superpower, and we are, right? It's become more of a multipolar world. There are new economic forces. China is one, Brazil is definitely another, and which is, I mean, very ironic that Trump is, congratulating them when, he could also be like, Brazil is, stealing our automaker, whatever, like they're a powerhouse.
Give it a week.
Exactly. Yeah, right. But what I'm saying is like we're, in some ways, Americans have an opportunity to avoid, I think, what countries like Brazil and Argentina and other countries which have staggering inequality, less so than before, but staggering still, because even though we have staggering, we're not quite there. We're not quite there, and we have a chance to turn this ship around before, it is unsafe to walk down the street, in all neighborhoods, right, and everywhere. So just to say, we're kind of peering into our future, but it's also peering into like what we could avoid.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, to anyone in a number of different groups in Brazil that's scared, like my heart goes out to you. It is a scary time, not just what he represents, but what the social movement that's putting him into power seems to represent. The acceptance of the possibility of torture and extrajudicial murder, death squads and things like that. Like, I hope that there's enough, checks and balances and things like that to hopefully keep him in check. And he says that he's going to, abide by the Constitution and things like that. I mean, that's usually what they say.
He also said he was going to dissolve Congress. It didn't help the effort to defeat him that he was stabbed during the campaign and
certainly
turned into a
right. And the Supreme Court has been completely politicized. Supreme Court, I think, had a major role in sentencing Dilma Rousseff, the former president, and the former president Lula da Silva to prison. And so again, this sort of like, we need to prevent our Supreme Court from being completely partisan and uncompromised.
Agreed. And that is an effort that he voted for, by the way. Of course, a little bit biased there. Anyway, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you, Francesca and Ben. We're gonna get rid of her as soon as we can. No, it's great to have you here. Brooke is gonna be joining us for the second hour. Way more news to get to. We will see you in just a little bit.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.